that's a real bed. And if we ever want to use this space as anything other than a bedroom, then back into the ceiling it goes. So how do you build something like this inside of a tiny house, where you don't have the budget to stretch to a commercial lift bed product, and the roof doesn't even structurally support the weight of a 200 kilo system that would be required to make this idea work anyway? Before I explain how I conceived of and engineered this lift bed, let's look at the problem we faced and why we thought this would be a great solution for our tiny house build. Even in a tiny house that's a bit bigger than most, space is still a thing that you're constantly negotiating with. This room was only ever being used for sleeping, and that felt like a waste. So the goal was to turn it into something that could be a bedroom at night, and a work desk, a dining room, a yoga space, or a gaming setup during the day. There was a practical side to this too. I wanted deep underfloor drawers for storage, and the only way to actually get into them was to get the bed out of the way completely. And when using it for dining or working, I didn't want to solve that problem by filling the room with extra furniture that then had to be dragged around every time the bed moved. Whatever was in that room needed to be built in and ready to go the moment the bed lifted. The tricky part was the feature wall. I wanted a light in there and some shelving, and I didn't want any of that disappearing or feeling awkward once the room flipped into dining mode. It had to work as a proper bedroom with no compromises, but also feel neutral enough that eating dinner in there didn't feel like eating dinner in someone's bedroom. All of that inside a footprint that was barely big enough to fit the bed in the first place. And on top of everything, it had to be affordable. The whole point of this would have been lost if it had just been some over-engineered, expensive novelty just for the sake of a bed that disappears. So the engineering part of this whole process began with a prototype that was based on the assumption that I'd be able to build something that was kind of like a forklift where all the weight was taken up at the wall. But I quickly realized that this wasn't going to be a viable solution. All this kind of structure and so on, which would require quite a lot of load weight calculations and engineering. And we were doing it all really just for the aesthetic, when in fact we could just put cables on each corner and it ends up being much simpler. And indeed, after several iterations that included flat weight panels buried in the wall cavity, a powered mechanism in a false roof, and roller guide tracks on the bedroom wall, I forged ahead with the bed suspended by cables. Well, it's come that time to finally build this lift bed. It's the thing that I've left till the end because I know there's a lot of finicky engineering and the possible outcome of disaster is real. I was reminded of a marketplace ad I'd seen for some gym equipment, the components of which I used for my prototype. Luckily, there's a lot of people that want to just offload their gym equipment cheap, which is amazing because actual bricks and so on, like these ones are probably about 5 kilos or something like that. And even just 20 kilos of metal these days in the form of weights costs about $120. And I got the whole kit for a couple hundred, and that's with about 150 kilos with a weight. So I based my concept around a pulley system that suspended my bed frame and mattress by wire rope from the ceiling en route to an external cabinet that would house the weights from the gym set. The important consideration that made the whole thing possible was creating a perfect counterbalance between the weight of the bed and the weights on the rails outside. So the bed and the rope and pulleys needed to support a total system weight of around 220 kilos. So my primary concern along with this idea was how the relatively weak foam-filled and vinyl roof could support the idea that I had in mind. The light bulb moment for me was seeing the extremely heavy-duty poles that I salvaged from the back doors I'd removed from the trailer. So these turned out to be the perfect heft and length to span the width of the trailer, and allowing the total weight of the bed system to be supported not from the roof itself, but rather from the poles attached to the rigid aluminum frame that holds the trailer's walls and roof together. Drilling holes through the pipe, then feeding wire rope through the ceiling to support the pulleys worked exactly as I'd hoped.
Very deceptive. A lot of planning has gone into just what you see here.
Now the whole rope and pulley system operated independent of the roof itself. With heavy-duty brackets bolted through thick metal at the front of the trailer,
My fears were quickly disappearing when I saw how robust and rigid the whole system was.
but before I knew the weight of the system, I needed to work out the other aspects of the bed. I found a lightweight aluminium basic frame which was perfect as it also had a shallow form factor.
One of the numerous other considerations was the height of the bed itself. So one of the first things I built into the tiny house was this cabinetry in the bedroom. Now, the idea was that I was making assumptions about bed height and mattress height to determine the size of this recess where the bed would be perfectly hidden and also flush with the underside of the structure.
In practice, I didn't take into account the pulleys having their own height buffer, nor the thickness of the underside of the bed paneling. And then, a couple of years ago, we also replaced our mattress, and the new one was considerably thicker than the original.
Let me tell you, there were so many considerations when it came to this type of idea, which certainly explains why it took so much planning and so many sketches to work it all out. So in order to design the space right, there was a number of things that needed to be in alignment when the bed was down. Side tables are at the right height. The bed is a good height for getting into or sitting on. And the feature alcove on the wall sits in a balanced visual position above the bed. When the bed has been raised, we have a whole new set of considerations. What were once supports for the bed to rest on now have to be seats that are at the right height in conjunction with the fold-down table. So as I mentioned earlier, we didn't want any excess furniture in this room at all, so we just thought we'd use these supports, which is what the bed was resting on anyways, and for a bit of comfort, throw a pillow on, and then they perfectly suffice for sitting at the table. And the only exception to that is the work setup. When working for hours at the desk, I needed something that would be more comfortable and with back support without having to drag a whole desk chair in here. So a portable boat seat proved to be an ideal substitute as it folds down flat when not in use, and I could hide the seat bracket on the flip side of this bed support lid. One click and away we go. Oh, I just need a little captain's hat and I'm all ready to work.
Overall, these support boxes / seats informed the height of the table when it was deployed.
So when the bed is up, the alcove just needs to be in a good location, but it was better when the mattress wasn't so thick. Finally, I needed an accessible power point to be available as I wanted to be able to run a power cord through the bed frame to this central hatch, so I could add to the dining ambience by being able to hang this pendant light here. So yeah, nothing too complicated for a first-time DIY home builder, hey?
Before I share the pros and cons of our experience with the bed over the past 4 years, let's look at the whole system in use.
As I mentioned earlier, the total system weight is 220 kilos. Luckily, the bed only has to be in perfect balance when suspended from the ceiling.
When it's in bed mode, the weight of our bodies are much heavier, so there's no risk of the bed floating. I later learned that due to the friction of the wire rope on the pulleys, there was no creeping when the bed was up or down, so the weight balance didn't have to be perfect.
That said, when you have some winter clothes on the bed or some extra heavy pillows, it suddenly becomes a lot harder to lift and it's much easier for it to glide down, so you kind of know when the whole system's out of whack.
Similarly, when we bought the larger mattress, I had to get into the weight cabinet outside and install a couple of more bricks to counter the extra mass. Here is the room in its different modes: sleep mode, work mode, workout mode, gaming mode, dining mode. Here's a real-time demo of the bed going from sleep mode to desk mode. It is a bit easier for two people to lift smoothly, as you can see that with just me, I need to get under it to do the final section. But we also aren't lifting it daily, so it's not that cumbersome. The drop-down table is not just balancing on the tilt-out panel underneath, but secured from side-to-side tilting by using these pins, actually just spare Allen keys, which prevents wobble. And just like that, you're in office mode.
So this was my first ever house build and my first ever major engineering project. So how do I feel about it 4 years on? Well, in the pros column, it works as designed. So yeah, it pretty much does what a bed does. Doesn't make any weird noises when you're in it or creep up in the middle of the night into the roof and get you trapped up there like some people think it might. Very low maintenance and has been completely safe so far.
I've loved the access to the storage boxes as the bed remains floating, which is definitely a unique feature. And the space really is more usable when you can convert it.
I mean, as you'd expect, it hasn't been perfect. I mean, for example, Heidi really doesn't like changing the sheets.
The tension on the wire against the mattress makes it difficult to tuck in the sheets, especially on the wall side, which is tougher to access. The bed is a bit noisy as it goes up and down, plus it's easily shifted out of balance as you pull it up, so it's not as smooth as I would like. Ultimately, it isn't as fast to deploy as, say, a wall bed, which can be a slight deterrent to wanting to bother packing it away at times. That, and we often treat this like a normal bed and push a lot of our junk under there, so there's a bit of extra shuffling of stuff if I wanted to look tidy. And lastly, it can be a bit of an odd room as a dining room, as we have things like bedside tables with stuff on them, as well as hooks with robes and clothes hanging everywhere.
So we kind of need to undress the room a bit and shove stuff into hiding if we actually want to use it for this purpose. However, we did consider this little shelf here for our dining room conversions.
By day, Heidi uses it like the back of a chair to hang stuff on. On a dining evening, we can remove the extra panel here and turn it into a regular shelf that we can put music or a decorative item on.
So in the end, we got a useful DIY room transformational tool that looks great, works great, and is thousands of dollars less than a commercially sold solution. And it's just a really neat feature of this tiny home.
Clearly this wouldn't work for everyone, but hopefully you feel inspired to experiment with your own DIY ideas in your unique tiny home setup.
So if there's anything else you'd like to see us do a deep dive on about our tiny house build, please mention it in the comments. Also, make sure you check out the full video series that documents the making of our tiny house, and please like and subscribe so you can see future big tiny adventures. See you next time.